Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today for our Taking Action Together series. My name's Amy McDonald, and I am the Director of Education here at the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. I would like to thank our partners who are listed on our website and who have helped us spread the word about this program series. I would also like to thank the AHEC team for helping us with all of the details of the program, big and small. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. This program is being conducted on a Zoom webinar. Our speaker is going to leave time at the end for a Q&A session. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Click on that button to submit your question. And at the end, I will relay these questions to Stanlee for our Q&A session. The program is also being recorded, and we hope that you will share it with friends who are not able to attend today or anyone else who might be interested. We're pleased to offer this program at no cost, but if you find today's session valuable, we would greatly appreciate a donation of any size to help us continue providing meaningful programs. You can easily make a gift through our website, and we will share the donation link in our chat. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's Taking Action Together series. Stanlee Stahl has been the Executive Vice President of the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous since 1992. She earned her undergraduate degree in political science and history from Miami University in Ohio and has graduate degrees from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. and New York University in New York City. Before joining the foundation as its executive vice president, Stanlee established Extra Helping, New Jersey's first prepared food transfer program. Prior to joining the JFR, Stanlee worked in the Department of Health and Human Services for 20 years. She also lived in Israel, where she worked for Israel's Red Cross Society. During the Holocaust, there were thousands of non-Jews who refused to be passive in the face of the evil they witnessed, rescuing Jews often at risk to their own lives and the lives of their families. In 1986, the JFR started out funding 8 rescuers, and that number quickly grew. Over the years, the JFR has provided monthly financial support to more than 3,600 righteous Gentiles living in 34 countries. The JFR is committed to providing this financial support until the rescuer passes away. The JFR preserves the memory and legacy of the rescuers through its National Holocaust Education Program for teachers. I am honored to be one of those very fortunate teachers who have been impacted by the JFR's incredible teacher training opportunities. I can honestly say that the training I received from the JFR changed the trajectory of my career as an educator. I'm even more honored to know Stanlee Stahl. She is a leader and a driving force in the field of Holocaust education. She's a colleague, she's a connector, she's a go-to, and on a personal note, Stanlee has encouraged me as a teacher in the trenches. She has pushed me to do things that I thought I couldn't do. And more than likely, if Stanlee told me to run through that wall, more than likely I would run through that wall. Her example has inspired me more than she'll ever know, and I'm honored to call her a mentor, and I'm even more honored to call her my friend. And so it is my incredible honor to introduce Stanlee Stahl.
Thank you, Amy. I'm not going to ask you to run through a wall. And I'd like to thank the AHEC for inviting me to be part of their Taking Action Together program. Today, I'm going to introduce you to the precious few, men and women, non-Jews, who had both the courage to care and the courage to act. So in my opening slide here, I just want to show you a picture of this gentleman. His name is Alexander Roslin, and he's with 2 little boys. I will be discussing him shortly. We're going to talk about rescue. So let us define it. As Amy said, during the Holocaust, there were thousands of non-Jews, mainly Christians, Protestants and Catholics, and some Muslims who lived in parts of what was used to be called Yugoslavia and Albania, who risked their lives to save Jewish friends, neighbors, relatives, and strangers from certain death. My remarks today are going to focus on Poland. For the majority of documented rescue occurred in Poland, but what you need to know is that rescue occurred in every country occupied by the Germans. Before we get into rescue, I think it's important to understand what happened to Jewish communities when Nazi Germany invaded a country. Each country's mass murders were preceded by a series of violation of rights. And these are the four stages of the destruction of European Jewry. The first was identification. Germans would come in, get the list of Jewish communities, had people inform on people, and Jews, with the exception of Denmark, were forced to either wear a yellow star or, as in the Warsaw Ghetto, a white armband with a Star of David on it. The second stage was expropriation of property and removal from employment, and Jewish children were removed from school. The third stage was isolation, where Jews were removed into ghettos, especially in Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, Jews were sent to transit camps. It was at the third stage, when Jews were sent into ghettos, that it became very difficult for a non-Jewish person to help a Jewish person escape or to hide them or to take care of them. And then the fourth stage was annihilation. Since we're going to look at Poland, I thought it would be good to share a little bit about the pre-war Jewish life of Poland. You need to understand the nature of the Jewish community. In 1939, and World War II started on September 1, 1939, Poland had the largest concentration of Jews. Jews composed 10% of the population, yet they were least assimilated. And for the most part, Jews and Poles lived in different worlds. Jews lived in towns and cities. Many Poles were agrarian. So what you find happening is the farmers would bring their grain or their produce into the village or the town to the Jewish miller, to the Jewish baker. So the interaction between Jews and their Polish neighbors was in the field of economics. For the most part, each felt like a stranger in each other's world. It is said that after Nazi Germany invaded Poland, few Jews gave serious thought to survival outside of the ghetto, and Jews clung to the false hope that as bad as things were, they wouldn't get worse. Remember, Jews have had centuries of persecution, and they had an indelible memory of what had happened before and what Jews through the centuries had done to deal with being persecuted. It is said that the Jews in Europe had choiceless choices: to leave the ghetto, to try to pass as an Aryan, a non-Jew, to go into hiding, to go east, Soviet Union, they didn't want the Jews, to go west, they didn't want the Jews either. So escape to the Christian world was a major undertaking, even if someone had plans to help them. So at the beginning, I showed you a picture of a gentleman. His name is Alexander Roslin. He's with two boys. That was Jacob and David Gutgeld. And it's March 1943, and we're in Warsaw. And the Warsaw Ghetto is down to about 50,000 Jews. Aunt Hannah is taking care of her three nephews, David, Jacob, and Shalom Gutgeld. Their father had left Poland in August of 1939, going to the Soviet Union to see if he can find a way for his family out of Poland. The winds of war were blowing. He got stranded in the former Soviet Union. Their mother died of starvation in the ghetto, and Aunt Hannah was taking care of the three boys. She takes off her armband, she goes out through the sewers, and she goes to the home of a pre-war employee. His name was Stanislav, only to learn that he'd been picked up weeks before by the Gestapo for being a black marketeer. She's sitting on the steps of the apartment building, and Alexander Roslin comes down and says, "Pani, miss," in Polish, "what's the matter? Can I help you?" And she feels everything is lost. She says, "I'm a Jewess. I was looking for Stanislav, so hopefully he could help me and he could take my three nephews." And without asking his wife, Mela, he said, "We will take the boys." And they worked out a plan, and they smuggled the 3 boys one at a time out of the ghetto. And he says to Aunt Hannah, "You come too." And she says to him, "You know, the festival holiday of Passover is coming. I have so few friends left. Let me spend Passover in the ghetto with my friends. I will come later." For those of you who know your history, the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto took place on April 19th, 1943. Aunt Hannah was rounded up. We believe she went to Birkenau. She was never heard from again. The 3 little boys remained with Alexander and his wife, and when his wife learned that they were going to hide, 3 little boys who did not look like them. The 3 little boys had dark hair and brown eyes. Alexander and his wife were fair complected and had blue eyes, and it was obvious these little boys were not their children. And she said to her husband, "We will be killed if we're discovered." And he said, "What did these babies do to deserve to be killed?" They kept the boys. Their son got typhoid, was able to go to the hospital. He was Polish Catholic. The little boy, Shalom, also got sick. And Alexander's son would save half of his medicine, give it to his parents, and they would give it to Shalom. Shalom died. So here is Alexander in the middle of Warsaw with a dead Jewish boy. He buries him around 2 a.m. in the earthen floor of the apartment building. They keep the boys. They survive the war. They're reunited with their father. They go to then Palestine, which is now the state of Israel. One of the boys becomes a leading mathematician at Tel Aviv University, the other a neurophysicist at Weizmann. Alexander and his wife come to America. They live in Clearwater, Florida, and when they pass away, they were buried back in Białystok, Poland. And so this is a story of somebody who had plans to escape the ghetto, who had a way out of the ghetto, yet nobody knew when the Germans would do liquidations against a ghetto. So who would try to pass as an Aryan, a non-Jew? Someone young, someone without family ties, someone who spoke Polish without a trace of Jewishness. Most Jews in Poland spoke Yiddish. I can go Dzień dobry, pani, I can jak się masz, but people in Poland know I am not a native Polish speaker. The Jews of Poland spoke Yiddish. Also, if you're going to try to pass as a non-Jew, the physical appearance needed to conform to the Polish look. Now, you never judge a book by its cover, but those were different times in a different place. Therefore, most Jews had to go into hiding because they could not pass as a Christian. The religious, the uneducated, those with limited incomes, laborers and tradesmen. And to go into hiding required the help of a non-Jewish person. This is a picture of religious Jews in the Tatra Mountains. But what you need to know is that the Germans employed the concept of collective responsibility. There were signs all over every country occupied by the Germans in German and in the language of the country, letting the Christian population know to help a Jewish person in any way carried severe penalties. In Poland and Eastern Europe, the penalty could be death, not necessarily the case in Western Europe. If you were caught helping or hiding a Jewish person, as I said, you, your family, and the Jewish people you were hiding were killed. If you denounced someone who you thought a neighbor was helping a Jew or was hiding a Jewish family, and you were right, the neighbor was killed along with the Jews, and you received a kilo of sugar, perhaps a liter of vodka, and a pair of boots. That was what the life of a Jewish person was worth. To hide a Jewish person in Poland and Eastern Europe was truly, truly a matter of life and death. If a Jewish person survived the Holocaust and was not in a ghetto, concentration camp, or with the partisans, that person received help from a non-Jew, whether it was food, paper, shelter, transportation. Transportation was several kinds. Taking someone out of the ghetto, and we're going to hear about Irina Sendler in a little bit. Or you talk to Jewish children who are in hiding on the Aryan or Christian side, and they would be taken from one apartment to another for fear of being denounced. And not being denounced was another way that Christians helped. So when you look at testimony and you read what is sent to Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Authority, as insignificant as the act might seem, the mere absence of that act could more often than not be fatal. How did rescue activities begin? In most cases, it was the Jewish person who sought help from a Christian. And help began gradually, a night or two, that turned into weeks, months, and years. Because in 1939, 1940, nobody knew how long the war was going to last. There were a range of rescue activities: helping Jews escape to safety, transportation, getting out of the ghetto, hiding Jews. So in this top picture on the left, you see two men coming out of a basement, and providing shelter was perhaps the most important thing that a non-Jewish person could do for a Jew. Helping Jews pass as non-Jews. If you were stopped on the street and you had forged documents, they might also say your prayers, and you needed to be able to do, if you were in Poland, which is Catholic, France, which is Catholic, Hungary, which is Catholic, Lithuania, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. You needed to do your rosary, and you needed to do it in Latin. This was well before Vatican II and Nostra Aetate. You're talking about the 1940s. Issuing protective papers. And if you look at the lower right, you see Schutzpass. And this is the document that was created by Raoul Wallenberg and the other diplomats in Budapest that helped protect tens of thousands of Jews from being picked up by the Germans and deported to Auschwitz. Providing food, medicine, and other essentials. Alerting Jews about actions. In the upper left, you see a Danish rescue boat. And perhaps one of the most famous stories where a German official let a member of the Danish parliament know that the Jews of Denmark were going to be picked up or rounded up on Rosh Hashanah in 1943. And the Jewish community was told, Rabbi Melchior, then the acting chief rabbi of Denmark, was told, and he told the congregation, we're not going to do Rosh Hashanah this year. Everybody should go to the seashore and take a break. And that is how the Danish rescue began. Individual and collective efforts. Most of the rescue was done by individuals or a family. There were rescue groups. And in the lower left, you see a collage of photos. And these are men and women who were part of Jagoda. Jagoda was that part of the Polish underground that was set up specifically to help Jews in hiding. It operated primarily in Warsaw. It was Warsaw, Łódź, Krakow, sometimes Białystok. And the woman on the top right is Irina Sendler, and we'll be talking about her in a little bit. So there was a whole range of rescue activities, but perhaps the most important was the provision of shelter. Who were the rescuers? The rescuers came from all walks of life. And here on the upper right, you see Alexander Roslin with David and Jacob Goodgeld. They were middle-class intellectuals. They were rich and poor. They were educated and illiterate. Ministers, priests, and nuns saved Jews. And you see a picture of Sister Alfonsa. And she was 19. She headed a convent in Przemysl, and she hid 13 Jewish children in that convent. And they were searched, they were denounced, but she kept those children safe. So when I have the best job in the world, I have met in the last 33 years, hundreds, if not close to 1,000 men and women who are recognized as righteous Gentiles. In Hebrew, it is Hasidei Ha'amot Ha'ulam, the righteous among the nations of the world. And they're wonderful people. I feel blessed that I have been able to meet such kind, generous, decent men and women. And many were religious. They will talk to you about their belief in Christ. They will discuss, the Good Samaritan from the Bible. Others were non-believers. Most were religious. And they said, how is I, as a Catholic, cannot follow the teachings of my church? The law of God is above the law of man. What you need to know, there was no typical rescuer. They were ordinary people, and we can also say who did extraordinary deeds. And when you talk to them, they will say to you, we did nothing special. They didn't then, during the war, or now consider themselves heroes. Some had Jewish friends before the war, others did not. Some rescuers were known anti-Semites. Now, I talked about Jagoda. There were two women, two Polish Catholic women who founded Jagoda. One of them, if you read her writings in Polish in a Catholic magazine in the 30s, were heavily, heavily anti-Semitic. Yet, she founded one of the major networks that existed during the Holocaust to save Jews. And they did what they did because they thought it was the right thing to do. That's for the most part. Each act of rescue was different. Each story is unique. And the fact that it occurred is important. And on the upper left here, you see Irina Sendler. And each of the pictures of these rescuers you can find on our website, and you can find their rescue story. And some of them actually have reunion videos that go with them. I've talked about Alexander Roslin. So let me introduce you to Pastor Andre Trocmé. Pastor Andre Trocmé is from the village of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon in south central France. It was a plateau of about 12 villages. They were Protestant in a very Catholic country, and they knew what it was like to be persecuted. And when the Jews started coming from Germany and Belgium and northern France down to what was at that time Vichy France, they were seeking shelter and help. And so Pastor Trocmé organized the Protestant communities of these 12 villages, and they took in the Jews. They set up children's homes for the children, and they began taking the Jews at night over the mountains into Switzerland. They saved more than 3,500 Jews. Kune Sugihara, the bottom, from Japan, and Aristides de Sousa Mendes from Portugal. Sugihara was stationed in Kovno, Lithuania, and Aristides de Sousa Mendes was stationed in Bordeaux, France. In order to get to Portugal from France, you needed to go through Spain. Spain required a transit visa of entry to Portugal. The same thing was true for people that were in Lithuania who wanted to go across the Soviet Union. A yeshiva student, a lot of people from Poland, when Germany invaded Poland, a whole swath of Jews started going east, and they went into Lithuania. And in order to go across the Soviet Union, you needed a transit visa to a contiguous country, which Japan was. And a yeshiva student learned that you did not need a visa to go to Curacao in the Dutch West Indies. And so both Sugihara and Mendes telexed their foreign ministries for permission to prepare visas. The answer to both of these men came back, no, 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 yet they issued visas. Mendes and Sugihara defied the Germans and their respective governments. They lost their pensions, their fortunes, and were publicly humiliated for their acts of altruism. Yet their actions account for the rescue of more than 10,000 persecuted Jews. And it wasn't until the 1990s that both Japan and Portugal, shall we say, rehabilitated their names and their stories. Irina Sendler. Irina Sendler was in charge of the Children's Bureau in Jagoda. She was a social worker, and she would go into the Warsaw Ghetto, and she would go to Jewish families, and she would say, give me your child, whether the mother was alive, the father, or both parents. And they would ask her, can you guarantee that you'll get my child out of the ghetto? The Warsaw Ghetto had very high walls, topped with barbed wire, with gates. There was the Jewish police on one side. There were the Germans and the Polish blue police on the other side. And she would say, no, I can't guarantee I can get them out of the ghetto safely. Can you tell me where you're taking my daughter? The answer would be no. Can you guarantee that my child will survive the war? The answer was no. Her answers were always no, I do not know, I cannot guarantee. Some parents, some mothers, some fathers would give their children or child to Irina. Others said no, and some said, come back in a few days. She would go back to that family or that mother 3, 4, 5 days later, only to learn that the family had been deported. The Jews of Warsaw, for the most part, went to the Treblinka killing center. And before COVID, I would go to Poland 6 or 7 times a year because we send money to Poland. The largest number of rescuers we sent to was in Poland, so there were always issues that had to be worked out. And I would visit Irina. She died on May 12th, 2 days ago, in 2008. But she wrote a story for me. And she wanted people to know about the bravery of the Jewish mother, who would give this woman, this Irina Sendler, who is maybe 30, their child without knowing whether or not that child will live, but it was the last best hope. And she just wanted the world to know about the bravery of the Jewish mother. The last person on this slide is Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds. And this is December 1944. It's the Battle of the Bulge. And it's the largest number of POWs captured in all of World War II. There was a group of about 8,000 men, of which there were some 200, well, more than 200 Jews. And they were taken to one prison camp, POW camp, and then they were taken to another. In the first camp, the Jewish POWs, in violation of the Geneva Convention, were put in barbed wire within barbed wire and were starved. They sent the non-commissioned officers were pulled out and they were sent to another camp. Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds, there was 1,292 American GIs. There were 200 Jewish soldiers. When they reached the second POW camp called Ziegenhain in the heart of Germany, the commandant, Major Sigmund, said, the Jews will present themselves tomorrow. The next day, Roddy Edmonds had every single American GI out front. The German major comes up and he says, they all can't be Jews here, when he sees almost 1,300 men. And Roddy Edmonds, who is from Nashville, Tennessee, said, Knoxville, Tennessee, he was 25. He had never met a Jew before until he went into the army. And he says to the German, we are all Jews here. And we're going to win the war. I mean, we're now January of 45. And the German backs down, and the Jews are not taken out and sent to Berga, which for the first POW camp, the enlisted men were sent to Berga, which was a camp in the mines where many, at least more than 50% of the Jewish POWs died. So these are rescuers. These are just some stories of rescue. And as I said, there are more on our website. I've already mentioned that Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Authority, documents who the righteous are. This is Olga Kukovic from Yugoslavia holding up her Yad Vashem diploma. She was from Sarajevo, and she dressed the Jews as Muslims, and that is how they survived. These are some facts and figures. These are numbers actually through December 31, 2022. And there are 5 Americans that are recognized. Roddy Edmonds was the 5th recognized. And there is a video on Roddy Edmonds on our website, should you want to look at the full story. What the numbers tell us is that rescue took place in every country that the Germans occupied, but rescue was very rare. The estimates range from 50,000 to 250,000. We will never know the true numbers. And I'm going to go back a little bit, because up until Denmark, Yad Vashem recognizes individuals, except for Denmark. The Danish resistance, and I believe I mentioned, and I showed you the Danish rescue boat, the Danish resistance asked that the entire resistance be recognized as a group. So if you go on to Yad Vashem and you look at the statistics for Denmark, you'll see very few people recognized in their own right. They did rescue outside of the official Danish resistance. We will never know the true number, because when Jews were denounced, the Christians hiding them along with the Jews were killed. Some Jews died after the war and were not able to prepare testimony for Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem was established in 1953, and they really didn't start recognizing people until after the Eichmann trial in 1960. rescuers were truly, as I said at the beginning, I was introducing you to the precious few. When you look at rescue, you need to consider a number of things. The nature of the German occupation. When the Germans occupied a country, they treated the country where they perceived that country to be on the racial hierarchy. Poland being a Slavic country, when they invaded the former Soviet Union, the Slavs were a rung on the ladder just above the Jews, versus Denmark, where the Jews never had to wear a Star of David. And by the way, it is a myth. King Christian X of Denmark did not wear the Star of David. Okay, there is a myth that he rode around on his white horse through Copenhagen. He did not. He did not wear the Star of David. You have to look at the scarcity of basic resources, the prevalence of anti-Semitism, local collaboration, and how well integrated Jews were in that country's society. It was very hard in Poland for a non-Jewish person to hide a Jewish person, especially Jews who lived in what we call the shtetls, the small villages. And then there's the moral dilemma of putting your family at risk. There's one thing if you're single. There's one thing if you're on your own. You're not going to worry about mother or father or grandparents. But in those days, both in the Jewish community and in the Christian community, multi-generations lived together. So you were putting a lot of people at risk. I personally am an adoptive parent, and I don't know what I would do. I wanted my son desperately, and I don't know what I would do if that meant, if caught helping somebody, which would cause not just my death, but the death of my child. It makes one think. So it's not for us today to judge what people did or did not do. Rescue offers us a legacy of hope that people are capable of holding on to their values in the face of diversity. Adversity, not diversity. There are always alternatives to standing by, and individuals can and do make a difference. That picture is of Polina Plaxe. She and her father helped hide 21 Jews. Rabbi Schulweis of blessed memory founded the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous. Goodness is a powerful mirror. Goodness challenges us in a way that evil does not. Compared to Eichmann, I am a saint, but compared to Alexander Roslin or Irina Sendler, how would I measure up? Would I unlock the door? Would I take into my home this frightened family? Would I keep them for days, months, years, knowing that discovery meant death? Jewish tradition teaches that for the sake of 36 righteous persons, the world is sustained. For the sake of 10 righteous persons, Sodom and Gomorrah would not have been destroyed. And the saving of one person is tantamount to saving the entire world. Many worlds were saved by rescuers. And I finished with my presentation. Amy already talked about what the JFR does. We've sent $46 million on behalf of the Jewish people. We are repaying a debt of gratitude to non-Jews, Christians, and Muslims who saved Jews during the Holocaust. And as Amy mentioned, we have a national and international Holocaust teacher education program. I urge you to visit our website, and I am available for questions.
Before we do questions, Stanlee, I was going to show a segment of one of the video documentaries that are featured on your website, and there are many of these video documentaries, that the JFR has done yearly. Since about 1998.
Right.
Yeah.
Up until COVID, and we
Right.
will be doing one this summer.
Okay. So I wanted to, these videos, we're not going to show it in its entirety. I'm going to show 2 clips so that people get an idea of the story, but we want you to be on the lookout after the program is over for a constant contact email where we will send you the link for the whole video. And there are so many wonderful videos on here. I've seen them year after year, and they bring me to tears almost every story that I hear. So I want to share This is one of my favorites. And just to give you some background on the story, this occurs in Radom, Poland. It's 1943. And just a very basic story. You're going to see 5 Jewish women who are going to be helped by a non-Jewish Polish teenager, Władysław Masuna. And he is going to be assigned a job at a rabbit farm, which is located on the site of a factory, a slave labor factory, and he is going to do everything in his power to help and protect these 5 young Jewish women. The women eventually are deported away from him. They're deported to Auschwitz. All 5 women survived the war, thanks in large part to his help and support. And then in 2010, the JFR is going to reunite Władysław with one of the young Jewish women. And it's just a very, very touching story. They had not seen each other since 1945. So I'm going to play a 3-minute segment that gives a little background. And then I'm going to play another 3-minute segment that shows their reunion.
Works at the armament factory in Radom. One day, I got a message that the administrative director of the factory wished to create a rabbit farm there. Special breeds for fur and meat, and I got the job. It was a big workshop far from the main part of the factory. Even the German guards hardly went there. And when I managed to get this job, I wanted to do everything that I could for the Jews in the slave labor camp.
Masuna was attempting to save some of the Jewish girls, and he was asking the German for young ladies whom they became siblings for life, and that was a mother and Sucha, and it was Rivka and Vora and Esther.
Władysław Mishuna was a supervisor, and he showed us what to do. Fed them, cleaned.
It was nothing like the work in the factory. The work was light, and the girls had food.
Mishuna was the one who brought us food. He brought us, his mother baked pies, brought us pies. If someone was sick, he brought medication.
One day, Raja showed me her hand and said, "Look at this." It was a skin infection, highly contagious. If the Germans saw that, they would have killed all of them. It was impossible to get any medicine for them, so I intentionally got the infection so I could get the medicine. And I smuggled it into camp.
Whatever he smuggled it to the camp, if they would have caught him, they would have killed him. He risked his life for this. He was talking to us to keep up hope, to keep up courage. Otherwise, we won't survive.
For them, it was a support for the spirit. It was feeding the hope.
When we got to know him, we couldn't wait to come there because he made us feel again like human beings, that we are important. Because before, by the Germans, we were nothing.
I was sending information out to the underground, and they gave me a small camera. If it was found on me, the Germans would have killed me. This is the picture taken in front of the rabbit farm. You see the girls sitting and preparing some food for the rabbits. Here is Racha, Sucha, Dvora, and Esther. I was thinking, if I will not survive, maybe this photo will survive. In July 1944, the Soviet offensive started. The Germans started preparing to liquidate everything. I was out behind the rabbit farm, picking some grass for the rabbits. Dvora, Esther, Rivka, they could have ended up here, as so many others did. Thank God it did not happen. You survived rainy autumn. You have to survive the winter. Believe me, the spring will bring joyful family reunion. Radom, January 1944.
I'd really like to say thank you to Mr. Mashuna because he really gave my booby a chance. He paved a road for all of us to live and thrive and be together.
It wasn't for that, today we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have Shirley and my children and grandchildren.
When I survived, you see, my mother changed with me. She was supposed to stay, and I was pregnant 9 months, and they took me away. And my mother was supposed to stay, and she changed with me. And my life after, I was thinking if I was worthy of it to survive in her place. And now that I have great grandchildren, I think my mother had something to do with it, that I live longer and lived to have great grandchildren. Vladislav Mishuna, I think he would be very proud of me. And I thank you very much, Mishuna, Vladislav.
At the end of the day, we always said goodbye as if we would never see each other again. And they kept saying, remember, if you survive. They have to know about us. They have to know about us. And I said, I'll try, but you must also try to survive. And someday we'll tell our story together.
Last time I've seen Mishuna was in Poland in 1945. Not for you, I wouldn't be here. There would be no family.
Sucha, we survived. Now we can tell our story.
So that is just an example of one of the many wonderful documentaries that you can find on the JFR's website, and also an example of the wonderful work that they do. So we will go with the Q&A now. And Stanley, I've already got a couple of questions, and I'll just start relaying those to you. One person asked, you've already mentioned the concept of Nazi collective responsibility, and the difference between Eastern and Western Europe. How were the punishments different? You said death was the punishment in Eastern Europe. What was the punishment in Western Europe?
In Western, thank you for the question, for whoever asked it. It's a good question. In Eastern Europe, the punishment was death, and that was what was on the signs. In Western Europe, it could have been one of a number of things. If you look at the Anne Frank story, you had 4 Christians who hid, Anna Frank and the others in the annex, from July of 42 to August of 44. And Miep Gies went into the Gestapo, was able to talk her way out of it. Nothing happened to them because she spoke fluent German, and they were fortunate. Nothing happened. You could be sent to concentration camp. You could be sent to prison. But for the most part, you were not killed. It was very different. And again, that goes along with how Nazi Germany looked at the countries that they occupied. France, Italy was an ally until September 43. And so Western Europe, jail, prison, we have stories of some of our rescuers some of the women being sent to Ravensbrück, which was a women's camp north of Berlin. but in Poland and in Eastern Europe, the punishment was death. And I didn't go into this, but if you were living in a little village, you know, are you living on a farm? They took the animals out of your barn. They put the Christians and the Jews in the barn, and they burned the barn down. If you lived in a little village, they maybe hung you on a meat hook in front of your house. And if you lived in a city or a bigger town, in the Renwick, which was the town square, they built a gallows and they hung the Christians, they hung the Jews, and on the Christians, they had a sign, "This is what happens when you help a Jew."
Okay, here's another question. How many rescuers are still living that are supported by the JFR, and do you have relationships with their children?
Yes. Great question. At our height, we were funding a year about 1,850 people in 34, 36 countries. We are funding people in 10 countries, and the number is 73, the majority being in Poland. There are rescuers in the Russian Federation, which we are not able to send money to because of the war, and we are sanctioned. We cannot send money into Russia. And so we're funding 70 plus rescuers. And so what happens is we're still sending about $725,000 a year. The amount of money we give the rescuers each month goes up. And at Christmas, we also do a Christmas gift. So at Christmas last year, every rescuer got $3,900. And for some of the rescuers, if you look at their pensions, I mean, their pensions could be $50 a month. So at Christmas, I think everybody received $5,500 from us for the purchase of medicine, food, warm clothing, home heating fuel. And yes, I know their children because I emailed with the children and the grandchildren. And if I have to get to mom or babcia, grandma in Polish, or whether it's Lithuania or Moldova or Hungary, I write to the children, sometimes the nieces and nephews. And now, because more people have the internet, I get photos. We send money 3 times a year based on monthly awards. We just sent for Easter. We sent at Easter, so we knew there would be food on tables for Easter. Our Muslim rescuers who are in Albania died a year ago. So we're right now only supporting people of the Christian faith, Protestant and Catholic.
Yeah, I love the about the, contacting the children and the grandchildren to get.
Yeah, I can show you pictures. They're wonderful. And the grandchildren speak English, and they
Yeah.
have Gmail.
Makes things a lot easier.
Okay,
Okay, here's a question. Are there any other examples like Roddy Edmonds' story where POWs work to shield or protect Jewish prisoners that you know of?
Not that I know of. And, you had 20,000 POWs from the Battle of the Bulge. And they went to several different POW camps. The first camp they went to was Bad Orb. And that's where you had the Geneva Convention. You had officers, non-commissioned officers, and enlisted men. And that's where they took the Jews out and they put them in barracks within the barracks. So at that group, there were no officers that stood up for the Jews. The Jews were put in a prison within a prison where they were systematically starved. When the decision was to take the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, in accordance with the Geneva Convention, they pulled the 200 Jewish non-commissioned officers out from the prison within a prison, and they sent them to Ziegenhain, which was, there were 3 POW camps in this one prison system. And that's when Roddy Edmonds refused. He had made friends with Lester Tanner, whose name at the time was Tannenbaum, but that's another story. And he was not going to segregate the Jewish prisoners. They were all American GIs. And that is how, and everybody listened. He was the one master sergeant. A non-commissioned officer are your sergeants, your staff sergeant, your one master sergeant, your corporals. Those were your NCOs, and those were the men that were moved. So I don't know of any other instance, because if you know, right before, at the time that the Battle of the Bulge took place, December 16th, they surrendered on the 18th or 19th, you had Malmedy, where the Germans came, the Americans surrendered, and the Germans shot everybody. It was the Malmedy massacre. So I don't know of any other instance during the war where, when POWs were captured, that the Jews were protected.
Yeah. And just as Doug Survey put in the Q&A, he was talking about watching the Roddy Edmonds documentary on the website, saying it's well worth your time, and for students, they'll really enjoy it. And I second that.
Thank you, Doug. Doug is another Lerner Fellow and head of the New Jersey Holocaust Commission. And there are two documentaries. Amy McDonald helped do the teacher's guide. There's a short documentary which is readily available, and there's a longer one which you can request the password and the link for. And there's a teacher's guide which was prepared by Amy McDonald of the Alabama Holocaust Education Center, along with several other teachers, but Amy did 99.9% of the work on the teacher's guide. So it comes with a resource, and it comes with a documentary that qualified for the Academy Awards.
Okay, this is interesting. Okay, for rescuers who had families, did the whole family typically know about the rescue and the sheltering taking place, or was it a secret from the other parts of the family?
That's an excellent question. It depended on the rescue. In some places, like there's a rescuer, Frida Adam. Amy, did you meet her when you were in Europe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Frida Adam, or Frida Adam in Berlin, she had to leave her husband because she was hiding a Jewish woman and the woman's brother, who was developmentally delayed. He was deaf and mute, and her husband was evil. He was a Nazi. So she had to leave him and did not tell him that she was hiding Jews. Other places, the whole family was involved. And if you had little children, they couldn't have friends over. They couldn't talk to anybody. It was a very different time and place. So it depended on the situation, you know, how they were hiding the Jews, where the Jews were hiding, how old the children were, etc. In some places, spouses did not, they were hiding someone in the barn. They may not have told their husband or their wife until maybe months later, or the children.
Okay. Robin Cook is on, and she is asking, how do we get the guide and the link to?
Okay.
I think she's talking about to the Roddy Edmonds.
Well, the guide is good for both the short and the long, and that's on her website. And I'm going to ask Miss Amy if she would send that out, and just email me and tell me when you need it, and we'll send you the link and the password.
Okay.
Hi, Robin.
Okay, I think we've got time for we've got two more questions.
Yes,
Have
ma'am.
any of the rescuers ever refused the support from the JFR?
No. You know, in order to be recognized by Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Authority, you needed to have done what you did for no remuneration. Okay, so if you talk to Jews from Poland who went down to Hungary, Romania, you had the border runners. You had to pay them handsomely. Those people were not recognized. So Yad Vashem has guidelines as to what a rescuer, what a non-Jewish person had to have done or not to have done in order to be recognized. And one of the things is you didn't do it for money. Now, there's a difference when a Jewish family says, you take my family of 5 or 8 people, and you come with some money because you all have to eat. There is that fine line, but we have never had a rescuer turn down funds. Now you're talking, we're now at 80 years out from the end of the war. I started 30 years ago. and men and women have passed on. And by the way, we provide a small grant for funeral expenses as well. And we would send in money through the Anne Frank funds from Basel, Switzerland, where the Anne Frank Foundation is based, different from the Anne Frank House, and they would provide medications to the rescuers. And we funded mostly people in Eastern Europe because their government pensions did not go very far. And so on behalf of the Jewish people, and we receive donations not from Jewish people, we have donations from people who are non-Jewish. They want to support their co-religionists, and it's just repaying a debt of gratitude. And we want to make sure that these men and women, and they're heroes in my mind, live out their remaining years in dignity.
So I think this is the best type of question to end on. This is perfect to end on this note. Somebody says, what is the most important lesson you think that we can learn from the rescuers for today?
Good question. I think there's several. One, as I said before, one person can make a difference, but I think you need to know your values. You need to know what you stand for. You need to have, these men and women had a moral compass. You need a moral compass. You need to know what's right. And you need to pass that on to your children and your grandchildren. And if you don't have children or grandchildren, to friends, to colleagues. And they're called righteous Gentiles, to lead a righteous life. Almost, if you listen to what Pope Leo the 14th just said, you know, you need to know your values and you need to be true. You need to have a backbone. And when someone comes to you and they're hurting and you know you can help, you do your best. And that you can make a difference, because as you saw in the video, and Amy met Professor Mishuna, I think she sat and had lunch with him, that you see in Hebrew, it's called Lador Vador, from generation to generation. You saw generations alive today because this man saved 5 Jewish women. And you saw one of the women with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And they're productive members of society, and they too make a difference.
I think that's all of our questions so far, but I did want to, we've got one more note, another note from one of your teachers, Amy Riggins.
Hi, oh my golly,
so
Jean.
good. She says it's so good to see your face and hear your voice, Stanlee. Thank you for everything.
Hi, Amy Riggins. Oh, I can't see who's on the call.
Right, yeah. But anyway, Stanlee, thank you so much.
Oh,
this has been just
Alabama Holocaust Education Center, for Lisa and Amy and Haley. It's my pleasure. You do outstanding work. You are one of our centers of excellence. You've been a center of excellence for years. The work that you do is outstanding, needed, necessary, and the folks in the Birmingham community and the greater Alabama community are blessed that you all are there.
And we can say the same for you. So I want to wrap this up again by thanking Stanlee and thanking everybody for being here with us. And this program is going to conclude our Taking Action Together series, but we are going to be participating in a new online series with several other Holocaust centers around the country called What History Teaches Us. The first session, we are hosting it online on June 25th at noon. And it's going to feature Jonathan Wiesen, Michelle Foreman, and John Archibald. And it will be about propaganda and media manipulation during Hitler's rise to power. So that is going to conclude and wrap up our program today. Thanks everyone for joining us. Be on the lookout for the email with the link to the JFR's website and videos. And with that, we hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you.